Alrighty, so looks like we are live. I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds so that everybody can join us. But yes, it's Wednesday. Welcome to Wednesday, 16th of September. It's Wellness Revival Festival Day. So I'm Louise, just to introduce myself, Louise Warren. I'm COO for EventWell. And we are obviously running this event today alongside PA Life. Really, really important topic, wellness at the moment, especially in the current climate. So we are running a panel session. So this panel session today is all about wellness and well-being in the workplace. Nice idea or essential? And we've got three amazing panelists with us today who are taking some time out to join us, and we'll answer any questions that you may have that come up for you during this session. So let me firstly introduce Laura Cabell-Abra. She is founder of Stress Matters and runs lots of mental health training programs through MHFA, Mental Health Foundation. We've got Chris Pinner from InnerFit. We have Claudine, the lovely Claudine Martin, who is a PA at the Ministry of Defence. So hello. I was going to say good morning then, but not. It's good afternoon now. So thanks guys for joining us. So yeah, big topic, well-being in the workplace, nice idea or essential. So I'm just going to dive straight in. So obviously, as we know, currently we're living in an incredibly challenging time. Approximately 2/3 of the events industry in particular have been affected by COVID-19 with regards to the mental health and well-being. So do you think mental health is currently being taken seriously by employers? And I'm going to direct straight off to Laura, if you want to kick us off.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, really big question, really important question you said. And I'm going to do a typical, like, sit on the fence a little bit answer. It is extremely important. And I think it is taken seriously by some. And we've seen some amazing initiatives and strategies come through from some people. But I think there are still some people that are ignoring the severity of the impact that this can have. So I think those companies that are trying, we're seeing varying levels of trying, from just doing something basic to feel like that they're doing something, right the way up to actually taking it very, very seriously and making it a strategic priority. But there are definitely some people that have just said, oh, it's fine. Yeah, no, my team are absolutely fine. And we just check in every month or so. And for me, that rings some little alarm bells that they're not necessarily taking it as seriously as they should. So I think it's a real mixed bag at the moment from what we can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Chris, what's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that would be probably to sit on the fence a little bit as well, but maybe in a different sense. But I'm really conscious that it's quite boring to sit in on panels where everyone just agrees all the time. So I'm not just going to disagree for the sake of it. But I would say that, like, obviously well-being is essential, but obviously surviving as a business is essential as well. So I think that's potentially where a bit of tension lies at the moment. It is nice to have if your business is on the verge of going under. So it would be naive to say that well-being is essential in that sense if you're thinking about investing in lots of seemingly smaller things to do with the well-being program. But there's a baseline, like obviously all of us on the panel, I believe, would agree that well-being is essential, because if you're not feeling well, then you're not working well, is our stance on it. So there's a baseline to start from. Those would be my thoughts. And then in terms of what we're seeing from companies, I'd agree completely with Laura. It feels like some are talking about it, some are doing a reasonable job, some obviously focusing on other things, but there's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And from your point of view, Claudine, as a PA, how do you feel?
Yeah, from my point of view, I agree with both Chris and Laura, and I think it's well-being for me is essential. And I will go with what Laura said initially. I think it all down to what the organization does and how important they see it. So I'll use my organization as an example. I'm a soldier, I'm in the army. So for us, it's not just a nice idea, it is essential, because if we don't have fit soldiers who are physically fit or mentally fit, we don't really have a supportable army. So I think some they've got no choice but to take it seriously, and some are still finding their way through it. But for me, yeah, I would definitely say it's an essential.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I would agree with you there. So moving on with that then, how important do you think that employers are looking at, that the employers, so owners of businesses, companies that employ staff, do you think that they're looking after themselves first? So when we think about when we get on an aeroplane and they always say, you know, you need to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. Do you think employers are helping themselves first and putting themselves first before reaching out to employees? Chris, what would you say to that?
I'm pleased we've asked the question. I'd have also put the question first, but in the context of work we've done with companies, but also thinking about myself and my company, it's a challenge, big time. And so we talk a lot about putting the oxygen mask on first, because in order to help other people, you have to be able to feel motivated, feel energized yourself. So I think it's really easy to forget if you're responsible for the well-being of other people. So we talk about how to lead and motivate through times of uncertainty. And that beginning part of the section, the first half, is all about putting yourself first, getting your own house in order, thinking about your well-being. And then the second half is then thinking about your team. So 110% love the premise of the question. And I think it's quite a difficult thing to do, especially given the nature of people probably on this call and on the panel. It's in your nature to try and help. And a byproduct of that unintentionally could be to kind of sacrifice your own health at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Claudine, I guess from your point of view, I guess, as you said before, in your environment, the employer has to kind of put themselves first, I guess, before they look out for you guys.
Yes, they have to in my organization, because leadership is a big thing in the army. That's what we go by. It's one of our biggest values. And I think, say, for my boss, he's a 2-star general. And I remember when this whole pandemic came through, it was all about making sure that he gets the stuff first, because they have to be seen being in the director role or the generalship role. They have to be seen as setting as example, because if they're not doing it right, what example they're setting below, because obviously in the army, we've got a rank structure. So they have to ensure that they're, wearing the oxygen mask, showing themselves first so others can look up to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think naturally we're all humans, so we all need to have positive well-being. And if you're in a leadership position, you know, I'm a big believer as well of that, setting that example. But I think it really comes down to culture. I haven't met any leaders that are putting themselves first that aren't actually looking after their team anyway. So I think if it's that kind of awareness and that part of the culture, that if the leader believes the importance of positive well-being, yes, they're doing it for themselves, but they actually then naturally very much are doing it for their team anyway. So I think I tend to see it more the stark opposite, the other way, where people haven't realized that they need to look after themselves, and therefore they're not necessarily looking after the team either, because they haven't seen it as a focus in terms of the kind of importance of well-being and the culture. So I tend to find actually when somebody does put it as high importance, looks after themselves, they're already looking after other people at that point anyway.
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, absolutely.
So I just piggyback on Laura's point as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Is this idea that as a leader, you're role modeling 24/7. So whether you do something or you don't, or whether you say something or you don't, like, people's behavior is influenced by what you are doing every single minute of every single working day. I just thought that was really, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but when Laura mentioned it, that kind of sparked that thought in my mind, like everyone's always role modeling type thing. And also I think it's worth noting that a leader is not necessarily someone who's like up at the top of the hierarchy. I think a leader is anyone who creates a future which wouldn't have existed otherwise. So anyone on this session can be a leader, I think, if you role model in the right way and do the right stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important message to carry across. Anybody that's joining us here can be a leader and can take that back to their team or whatever it may be. So talking about sort of moving on to sort of vulnerability, how do you think of vulnerability and self-awareness comes into building resilience? So your ability to bounce back to where you were from adversity. Obviously, we're in these strange times at the moment. So how important do you think it is to build up resilience, both physically and mentally, to be able to carry on? Claudine, what would you say to that?
I've always said to everyone that resilience is one of my biggest strengths. And I think when you've got the ability to bounce back from adversity, not only that, you learn so much about yourself, because you identify things in you that you think you'll never know that you're able to do. I'll use myself an example. I'm a soldier in the army, but I've also been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And I remember when I was diagnosed 4 years ago, my future in the army looks a bit daunting, because to be in the army, they expect you to be at a certain medical fitness. And I remember I looked at it and I'm like, I love being in the army. I'm not going to let this affect me. I got diagnosed, I took my medications. And then from then, I just remember growing from strength to strength. And I started out thinking, right, I need to inspire others who are going through the same. And I think done that, my friends and family said, I've seen a different side to you. And I said, I haven't changed. I just think of what I've gone through, overcoming that adversity. I've built so much on my resilience. And I think that's quite important in organization, one able to identify their strength and know what they're going through. It's quite important building from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well done you. Yeah. Laura.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, incredible story, Claudine. Thank you. Such an inspiration. I think you're completely right. And I was going to pick up on that self-awareness part, which I think you've just exemplified perfectly, which is, for me, resilience and self-awareness are so interconnected that actually the more we can understand about ourselves, the more we can understand what's causing us potential stress, how we react to stress, how our body reacts to stress, how connected we feel to other people, how our mental health is. Actually, when you add all of those things together, we talk about it in kind of these kind of 4 different areas of wellbeing, so physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and building up the resilience across all of those 4 areas. The more you become self-aware, the more you understand how you can improve your own situation, which for me is a lot where resilience comes from, that kind of adaptability. And we always talk about it actually, rather than bouncing back, but bouncing forward, and rather than just kind of surviving whatever it is actually becoming stronger and being better than the first place. And for me, that's the real kind of benefit of resilience, is actually you get somewhere further than what you would have done, rather than just ending up in the same place. So I'm always a big fan of challenging the kind of definition a little bit of resilience and saying, yeah, bounce forward rather than bounce back. Because I think if you can really learn from it and you're self-aware, and that's what you're taking from it, is you're learning anyway. So through that experience, as Claudine said perfectly, like, no, that's who I was anyway. You're actually learning it. You're just maybe showing it to other people in a stronger way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's a great thing to take away from this today. Definitely. It's all about bouncing forward, not bouncing back. We certainly don't want to be going backwards. That's for sure. Chris, do you want to add to that?
I'm thinking of like useful stuff to say, because the guys obviously thinking of some useful things. So I'd say, yeah, Laura's point about health. I think for me, like the health is the foundation of resilience. Like if you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're not moving well, it's really tough to be resilient in the first place. So I think that I would just kind of tie a bow around that point. And then Claudine, your point, like amazing. It reminded me of listening to Kelly Holmes's story at the weekend. Because she was in the army. She bounced back from like a ridiculous amount of stuff, but she also got in the habit really young of reflecting. So I think she was writing like lots of basically journaling every day from being a teen. And so we talk about self-awareness, talk about self-regulation, also talk about self-reflection. And I think self-reflection is quite an important thing, at least in my experience, to actually be aware of how you're feeling and take action and be resilient off the back of it. So for the last 3 months, I've probably managed to do more or less 5 to 10 minutes reflection at the end of each day. And it kind of just wraps things up a little bit. It says, okay, Wednesday was a busy day, feeling good. Thursday was mixed, whatever. So I think I would just add that final point on self-reflection, kind of being a basis of which to build.
Yeah, can I add to that? I think you're completely right, Chris. I don't believe you can have self-awareness unless you're constantly reflecting. So yeah, whether or not you build that into a daily practice, as you said, of journaling or meditation, for example, but I don't think you can be self-aware unless you're reflecting, because for self-awareness, you've got to be learning. So you've got to be looking at the situation, and however fast it might be, and it might be that those people that are actually pretty self-aware just do it without even thinking and don't need to journal because they're constantly kind of filtering it through their head. But I think that reflection bit is completely key. I don't think you can be self-aware unless you're constantly learning and looking back and then looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also think, just like what you've just said, Laura, also when you reflect back and what actions you do from overcoming all of that, the people around you will see what you do as well. And if they're also going through the same thing, they will look at what they've seen you've done and probably ask for tips and advice. So it's not only that you're building that for yourself, but you're also inspiring others around you to do the same.
Yeah, and that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about helping others. If you can help yourself first, then you've got the capacity to help others. Yeah. So talking about obviously the current times and everything else, let's switch to sort of presenteeism in our industry and in our, you know, in our organizations. Presenteeism, so being present at work, is a serious expectation from employers, and it's starting to be as big a problem as what absenteeism is. You know, employers are expecting 100% from employees all of the time, and this is starting to be a problem. How do we support the creativity and productivity of our teams by having mental health at the core of our business and at the core of our culture within our businesses, so that it isn't just a nicety occasionally, i.e. drinks on a Friday? How do we really embed well-being into our businesses so that, you know, there isn't a factor of absenteeism? Chris, do you want to start off with that?
Well, I get to go first. So I think it's worth noting actually that it's actually way bigger than the challenge of absenteeism. I think Vitality's Healthiest Workplace report 2019 said it was in the region of 13% of productive working hours are lost versus 1.2, 1.5% from absenteeism. The reason we think about absenteeism a lot is because it's just easier to measure. So I think the scale of the problem when it comes to presenteeism is just huge, and measuring it now is just going to get even more difficult, because if we think about what does presenteeism actually mean, in my head it means being at work when you're really not at work mentally. So no one's really at work physically in the office now, I suppose. So you can't really see, it's difficult to really measure the productivity side of things. So I think it's a bigger challenge than people realize. And I think actually how do you solve that problem comes down to just our understanding of mental health and mental fitness and cognitive performance overall. So it's kind of think about it as a full spectrum. At the one end, you might be really sluggish and grappling with getting any work done. At the other end, you can be thinking of game-changing ideas and really like on peak performance type things. So I think it starts with understanding the full spectrum that people might be in and just trying to get to that N+1. So if you're really feeling sluggish, how can you get to feeling okay? If you're feeling okay, how can you get to performing really well? I'll stop there because I'm interested what the other guys have to say.
Yeah, sure. Laura, what do you think?
Well, the stat, I love it when people bring up stats. So Chris has inspired me. So one of the stats that I know, and I think it's from the Deloitte study earlier this year, is presenteeism actually costs more than absenteeism. So it's 3.5 times the cost of absenteeism. So as Chris was saying, for me, presenteeism is, you know, when you're making mistakes at work, when you're not being productive, when you're impacting the morale of other people as well. So by you being in the workplace or working online and interacting with other people, it can have that kind of ripple effect across the wider team. And I think it comes down to, for me, down to culture. So if you've got a culture where you're building the importance and understanding of, one, the cost of poor mental health and well-being, but getting people to understand that having positive well-being is such a positive thing, that you can be far more creative when you are well, you can make far better decisions when you're well, you can be far more productive, that encouraging people to take a sick day when they are sick. So I'd far rather see absenteeism go up, but know that everybody in the team is actually really productive when they're there, so presenteeism declining. And I think that's a really positive thing. So a lot of companies will say, oh yeah, we have really low sick days. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily a good thing, because there might be an internal pressure that people need to be at work. So actually, as you say, it's a case of getting companies to understand that absenteeism, okay, it's not great, but also presenteeism is far worse and it's costing the company far more money. But actually we need to make it okay to say, I'm not okay, can I just have the day off? Or barely even ask, frankly. If somebody's ill, they shouldn't be in work. And I think actually if you need that extra day off just to reset for whatever reason, mentally or physically, of course, then actually that's going to mean you're more productive when you go back into the work. I would just challenge Chris on the the productivity thing. I think we can track it, but I think lots of companies don't track it. And I think that's where there's a really big opportunity for people. Some industries obviously can't, but I think there are a lot of industries where there is the potential to track people's productivity in a positive, helpful way, but we just don't do it. And I think that's a real big kind of opportunity for companies to see the actual return on investment of things that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Claudine, what would you like to add to that?
Yes, I'm just going to piggyback on what Laura just said. I agree that it's definitely got a lot to do with the culture of the workplace. A lot of it depends on the environment that you create in the workplace. And I think one of the key things for that is you need to have that awareness in the workplace, especially when it comes to mental health. Because I think a lot of that stems from the stigma that's surrounding people think that, right, this is too much for me, rather than going in to speak to their line manager, they're going to think that they're going to seem as being not efficient or capable enough. And I think it's just that, I think that workplace should have like protocols or process in place where at the end of the day, you're all a team, especially if you've got a big team in. If the workload is coming in and it's just too much for one person, then you've got a team, you can split it. Today is the same. I'm covering a few people's job because some people are working from home and some people are away. And there was one job that I had to do, and I just went over to my team and I said, right, I'm snowed under. I've got this, that doing. Do you mind taking over? But for some people, they would find that hard to do because they would think that they're going to think that they're not capable enough. So I think, I agree with the culture. And I think it just needs to have that awareness in the workplace about getting everyone included.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have, any of you have any sort of tips or ideas when kind of businesses are looking at, the productivity of their teams? How can they really drum in, the importance of wellness within the business? And it's not just about doing drinks on a Friday. What other things could they kind of look at? Chris, what would you suggest to that?
I think this is at the heart of the whole title of the session, isn't it?
Yeah.
Laura, when you rightly challenged me on that point. I don't know exact words I said, but this is the whole point, isn't it? Like, obviously we believe that well-being is essential, not just nice to have. But the problem, and the reason why 99.9% of people don't believe it, is because it's hard to prove. So in terms of tangible steps, I suppose I think about stats and stories. So stories, obviously your emotional side of the brain, and then your stats would be your logical side, and that can be pretty useful, because if you're thinking about getting leadership buy-in and actually creating a culture of wellbeing where people believe that wellbeing impacts performance, you have to talk in their language. So you have to talk in pounds and pence. So anecdotally, at one level, you can quote stats like we've come up with today about how mental health is important. More specifically, and perhaps more interestingly, you can try and do it specific to your organization. So if I think what we did with Discovery Channel, we had one project where we had an 80% improvement in how people felt with regards to their overall health and well-being. And we had overall people say that they thought they were consistently performing at their best 15% more often. So if you can then create statistics like that and say, look, we did this is the result it had, impact it had, all of a sudden that just raises a few eyebrows and grabs a bit of attention. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Any Claudine or Laura, do you want to add to that at all?
Yes, I'll just add to if other things that I think employers probably can implement in a workplace to sort of alleviate all of those issues. What we've done in our workplace, and it worked for us, we put in like a mentorship scheme in our workplace, and because you tend to find that some individuals might not be comfortable going to certain line managers or certain people, so we've put in a mentorship thing where they can choose that person as their mentor. So if there's an issue, they always have that person that they can go and speak to, that can feed it up to the line, rather than having your line manager, you may not feel comfortable doing so. So I think mentoring, it's a good system that they can put in place in a workplace to sort of alleviate those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura?
I think both of them brilliant points. Exactly two of the things that we do is those insights programs to get people to, I think once you have the data to understand how your team currently are, I always kind of say, if you know the problem, you can fix it. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it, and you can't see if you fixed it. So it's really important to run some kind of insights program to understand how everybody's doing now. When you do your interventions, then the impact, as Chris has some great stats there in terms of the impact afterwards. Things like the mentoring program, we call it buddy systems. So we also have buddy systems in companies, and they work really well, and having kind of wellbeing champion networks internally as well. So quite often we see that wellbeing will be the role of one person for the whole company, and that's so much pressure on that one person, and inevitably their day job comes by. So we always say try and spread that load across the company, and that also shows the cultural and the business commitment to it as well. If they've got 10, 20, 50 people that are actually all supporting wellbeing across the business, rather than it all relying on one person or one team, actually it has a far greater impact, because you've got people that, like as Claudine was saying, like people that want to go and talk to certain people and not others. So actually if they've got somebody that's like them, that they trust, that's talking about the importance of wellbeing, then that's a really positive thing. But I think it comes back down to the kind of awareness that we've been talking about, that actually if you can provide the ability and the education for people to improve their awareness around their own mental health and well-being and that of their colleagues, but also just simply communication. I think so many companies, and we particularly work with quite a lot of communication companies that, you know, in theory should be great at communicating. They communicate with different people as their job, but actually sometimes are terrible internally and kind of communicating internally. So I think actually being able to talk about the importance of being really open and honest, and our favorite question of how are you doing, and listening to the answer, and just some really important basic hygiene factors, I think, to actually building a more in-depth program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really, really, really good points there. Just moving on to the next question that we were looking at. What would you say though to an employer who said they don't have the budget for mental health or wellbeing initiatives in the organisation? Claudine, what would you say to that if an employer turned around to you and said, you know, we don't have the budget to look after you?
If they say that, you know, I would signpost them to relevant organization that does free advice on wellness and well-being. I think it was maybe a few days ago, I received this email. I think it was from the Big Smoke event, and they had a whole blog about mental health in the workplace, and they were giving a bit of advice and tips how you can implement those, and it was things that didn't really cost money. So there are a lot of websites, there are charities. I would also signpost them to charities that does that, even to the NHS website. The NHS got like things in place, posters that they signpost you to relevant stuff. So there are things that you can do to implement well-being in the workplace without costing money. It's just being signposted to relevant organization that will give you those information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting the relevant information. Laura?
I would say back to them, it's costing you money already.
Yeah.
Going back to the Deloitte study I mentioned earlier, they reckon on average it's costing employers £1,700 per person per year on average, regardless if you have a mental health illness or not, just across the board. So if you think about, if you've got a team of 10, a team of 100, a team of 1,000, it's costing you money already. So I would say that, and to Claudine's point, a little plug as well from our side, we across the whole pandemic have been doing free wellbeing consultations with companies as well. So exactly to Claudine's point, there's lots of companies out there like us and like others that are happy to give that information for free, and we've created lots of checklists for people. So just making it as simple as possible. There are loads of free things, but I would still say to a company, it's costing you money. So it's going to save you money, and we can prove that in the insights programs we do. It will save the money in terms of the cost, in terms of what I mentioned, things like the presenteeism cost. It will save the money. So it might seem like a cost, but actually it's going to be saving the money over that period of time anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, your thoughts on that?
I suppose if you pay, then you pay attention. Like we hosted a few webinars like recently as well, and one person, I stole that from someone, and it really landed, because if you pay, then you pay attention. If you're doing wellbeing initiatives, then you get involved, you get the most from them. And if you're not paying for anything, like, you're going to pay attention because your business isn't going to work. So my thoughts would be like to echo what the guys just said, but also try and put myself in their shoes. I suppose, like, maybe there actually isn't any budget right now. So it's asking questions like, scale of 1 to 10, how committed to wellbeing are you right now? How much do you value the wellbeing of your team? And if they say 4, then understand why. And if it's a valid reason, then great, let's wish them luck. And if they think that they're doing it okay, but actually it's costing them money, as Laura pointed out, then you can delve into, this is the impact it's having, these are the statistics, these are the stories. Tell me about someone in your team who recently shared their mental health story, because guaranteed there will be people there, and probably a lot more people actually afraid to talk about it. I think a danger at the moment is lots of companies are having their pulse surveys, and there's been, I don't know if we can swear, but there's been a lot of them go out, and so many questions are being asked, but there's almost a hesitance around answering them, because budget understandably needs to be a little bit flexible at the moment. So the worst thing you can do really is ask a question which you then don't give an answer to, especially when it comes to mental health. So I think there's a danger there. And I kind of keep waffling on, I'll stop, but I noticed there were a few questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, there are. But that's actually good that you just brought that up about opening up and opening doors of conversations. That's what's going to lead me on to my last point, really. Obviously, we've talked about presenteeism and absenteeism, but often it's the culture of the businesses that cause negative well-being for employees, which leads to absenteeism. You know, what would be some really simple, easy first steps for businesses and employees to look at and work towards opening those doors of conversation, to break down the walls of resistance and barriers, to get them to start thinking about mental health in the workplace? I know obviously we've talked about, you know, some of the things that you've suggested there, but is it a case of whether or not would you send an employee on a mental health maybe course, and then there's somebody within the organization that can be the person that anybody can go to if they're suffering? What kind of avenues do you think would be a good place to start? Laura, what would you say to that?
So mental health first aider training. So as you mentioned before, we're trained by Mental Health First Aid England to deliver their courses, and I think it's great. I think it gives the individual that's on the course the understanding of the signs and symptoms of mental ill health, but they're trained specifically then to help the rest of the team. So they're trained to help people. So regardless of how much people help them, they have that knowledge for themselves and they can impart that knowledge to other people. So I think it's a really, really useful skill. Exactly like physical first aid, we should have those mental health first aiders. But I think it's about, and that I would definitely promote, but I think even on the level of the free stuff that we've kind of talked about, the kind of the real entry level stuff is, as Chris said, lots of people are doing pulse surveys. Yes, we do our own insights program, but even if you have a pulse survey, I think Chris's point about actually listening is so important. That I've spoken to people that say, yeah, we do a pulse survey. Okay, can I see the questions that you have that might lead into an understanding of well-being? They don't have any. So they think they're checking in with the team because they have the pulse survey, but they're not actually looking at the questions they're asking, which means they're also not getting the data back that they need. So understand how your team are. And as Chris said, actually listen to it, which is one of the things you learn in mental health first aid mental health first aid courses, is how to listen properly. But listen to what you hear and then act on it. And if you can't act on it, as Claudine said earlier, signpost to somebody else that can support, for example. So there's so many free resources available, and the most basic thing is just asking a question of how somebody is and spending the time listening. And I think even if if company didn't do anything else, if they didn't train first aiders, they didn't do an insights program, they didn't do anything else, but they actually started asking the question, how are you doing? And listening to the answer, I think it has a really dramatic impact on, well, I know it has a dramatic impact on culture. And even if that's the only thing that changed, that will change the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important question, asking how are you, and it's not just about how are you doing, it's about asking specifically how are you today, because every day is different, you know. So I think that's really important, is to put the emphasis on today, you know, how you're doing in this minute. Claudine, what would you like to add to that?
Yes, so I'll just agree with what Laura said about definitely getting people forward to do the mental health first aid course. I think it's good having representatives who have done the course and are qualified and know what they're talking about in the organization, so that they can have people that they need to go to. I think importantly as well, yes, getting people to do the course and then you've got them in the workplace. But I think one of the key things that I would also say that they should do is, you need to have the awareness in the workplace and letting people know how important mental health or well-being is in the workplace. Because if you send people on the course, but those people don't know that those people have been qualified, or they'll be fine to go and speak to those people. So I know what we've done in our workplace. We have sent people on the course and we've got those people who are qualified, but we've put like posters all over in our building talking about it. So we're raising the awareness about it to try and get rid of that stigma, so that people shouldn't feel scared to do so. So I think one of the most important things for me to say is having the awareness in the workplace, put it out there so people can know it's actually there and they're comfortable going to people to speak to them about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, do you want to finish that off?
Yeah, so I suppose take a step back. We're talking about creating a culture of well-being is one interpretation of this. And I think that you finish with embedded integrated well-being through everyone's behaviors and actions and ideas, but you really begin, I think it's like Kotter's 8-step process for leading change. And step 1 is around creating a sense of urgency. And then you can go on to building a coalition of people and set the vision and work through that. So if I think about those 8 steps of change, like it does begin with injecting a sense of urgency and creating that mini coalition at the beginning. So I think it leads on from what we spoke about before about stats and stories, but also like picking the right people to have the conversation with. Like if you've got, for example, like we had last week, someone who's got an executive management team with 10 people on, and they've got a board of 10 people, but only 2 people on the executive management team care about wellbeing at all, and the other 18 is not on the radar. Like pick the people who will listen, to Laura's point. Like you need to start small, galvanize the key people that are actually interested and aren't just going to reject it outright, and then start to raise people's attention because, oh wait, something is happening here. This little group are having quite a good time and they're working really well. So maybe we should change that way. So I think it's easy when we think about cultural change and shift to get intimidated by the scale of the problem, but starting small, I hope that's a reasonable enough point to conclude on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to put out to the floor now, and we've actually had quite a few questions come through, so I'm going to crack on with those because I'm just conscious of time right now. But I'll start with the first one at the top there. We've got somebody, George Bell, has asked, there are a lot of self-serving digital mental health platforms on offer. What do the panel think about the effectiveness of such programs versus group-based activities? Anyone want to pick up on that?
I'm happy to go for that. So it depends on the learning styles, I think. I totally understand where some people like to just involve themselves, really kind of read and understand the words that they read on the page. Mental Health First Aid England courses, we used to run as 2 days offline. So therefore it was entirely group and live, and some people really enjoyed that. Since we've moved them to be online, there's an element of self-study for a couple of hours a day, and then there's also a group live element. And I really do think for lots of people, and from my personal learning style, I think it's really good hearing stories from other people and having that ability to open your mind. We call it your window on the world. So kind of increase your window on the world, which we've been talking about in terms of self-awareness. I think it's really useful to do a session where there are other people, because you hear other people's points of view. You might not have experienced depression yourself, but if that person has and they're willing to share about it, you might learn a little bit more than you might from a textbook. So I would say if the opportunity presents itself, it's really useful to do it where there is at least some element of the group session, just to hear those other points of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, somebody else, Tracy's just put, she did the mental health first aider training 3 years ago. She says it's definitely worth doing, but unfortunately there's not enough women who are mental health first aiders in their workplace, which is an interesting point. So yeah. Sharon has put, due to my team working on a rota system and all team members are being individuals in both abilities and interests, how do you create well-being activities to engage them all? Claudine, what would you say?
Firstly, it's you'd have to find it's got a lot to do with the personality, I think, of the individuals that are in the organizations. And I think what we tend to do is when we're doing stuff like as a team to get together, we always put ideas through. So rather than just say, this is what we're doing, I would just put different options, gauge the appetite for what everyone wants. And then if so be the case, whatever the majority comes with, then we'll do that and get a good get together. But that's how we always do it in our workplace. We sort of gauge the appetite of what everyone wants, because personality got a lot to do with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good to get as many people involved as possible. Gemma's put, what would you say to a company who will not look at doing a pulse or an annual survey unless they get shown the stats and an end result, which makes it difficult? This makes it difficult putting ideas forward. Chris, seeing as you brought up pulse surveys, what would you say to that?
Yeah, my head's still in the previous ones, but I think George's point is an interesting one. And I actually know George, so I'll message you after. And then in terms of rota system, I think it's an interesting idea that well-being should be inclusive and for everyone, especially now, rather than exclude anyone. So I think what you offer is part of the question, and I'd agree completely with Claudine, and tuning into what people want and basically lining up. Then also how you deliver it is an interesting one. So if you do it in an open, conversational way, I find a lot of the time that's more engaging rather than just hosting like the right type of session on the right topic, but not doing it in the right way. So sorry, I'll finally come to this question on pulse surveys. It's a difficult one. It is chicken and egg a little bit, isn't it? Because I'd probably want to understand a little bit more about their objection to doing a pulse or annual survey unless they get shown stats in the first place. But I suppose if they're really holding to their guns on that one, probably talk about the benefits that other people have seen by doing it, and link back to our conversation on stats and stories. It's quite, that's a difficult one, because I struggle to see how someone can't be at least open to the idea of doing that.
I would say, can I jump in? Sorry, I was just going to say, obviously pulse surveys, insights programs and things can cost money. As I said before, so we do a wellbeing diagnostic thing that is free. So for the kind of company exactly like that, where is that, Chris said, it's chicken and egg, you know, you're either, and I would very much ask that question of, if they're interested in the data, why are they not actually interested in the data? It sounds like a bit of an excuse, but I would get the basic information from a free wellbeing consultation type thing, and then present that and take that information, so that yes, it might not be the whole company and it might not be completely specific, but it's enough to start the conversation, or it might be enough to start the conversation. But I think I would very much question if they're behind it, if they're putting that barrier up of saying, well, we need to see the proof, because you're either behind it. And we have a workplace wellbeing model, and the first or second point on it is senior leadership buy-in. So Chris is, 2 out of 20. You've got to be talking to the right people, but if they're not interested, it's not the right time, and then question whether or not it's the right company for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Claudine, did you want to add anything onto that?
Just pretty much exactly what the others are saying. I just understand why anyone would want to buy into it. It's good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like partly building the airplane while it's in the air as well. Like we've found that it can be quite intimidating to come up with a nice shiny strategy which then just sits in a folder somewhere and doesn't get used. So if you really want to measure statistics quickly as you go, then do a few sessions, host some polls really quickly at the end, which is so easy now. And get some live feedback, and then inform your strategy literally in the space of like a few weeks. And that's a really quick way. You don't have to do a big shiny pulse annual survey. Just get some quick and dirty stuff to at least go off. Yeah,
absolutely. Just finally, Alison, one last comment. She said, I work for a fire and rescue service, and we have a CEO who reinforces wellbeing as a vital part of our culture. We're very lucky. I think that self-reflection is something that is often overlooked in an office environment. Yeah, 100%. Obviously, as we've touched on that. I think, the takeaways from this is about opening up the conversation, asking how are you today? And then also, looking inwards as well. How are you doing as a person inside, and how can you help others? Did anybody have any final comments to finish on today? No.
I really hope it was useful.
Any take homes? What's the biggest take home anybody could have today? I'm going to go with how are you today? Just keep asking. It's so important. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you. What was that, Chris? Sorry, Chris.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. The sun is shining, and that always helps.
There you are.
Share knowledge. Oh, Tracy said share knowledge. Yeah, absolutely. Share knowledge. I think that's really, really important as well. Well, thank you so much to the three of you, Chris, Laura and Claudine. Thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and answer some of those questions that we've had in from the guys. I've got to hand over now. We've got a sponsor for this session. We're delighted that TU Training, that provides mental health first aid training, sponsoring the session. So Martin Ellis is going to tell you a little bit more about that. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Martin Ellis from TU Training. We deliver mental health first aid training. It's clear the COVID situation has heightened awareness of mental health issues in the workplace. Many people now working remotely are struggling with changes imposed upon them. Others just don't cope too well with the restrictions in their everyday lives because this new normal isn't so easy to adapt to. An interesting point, mental health issues are now the #1 cause of people taking time off work, surpassing back pain. Apparently, it costs industry over £80 billion a year. Interesting. But unlike physical health, it's difficult to know when a person has mental health issues. Whether suffering with stress, anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, addiction, sufferers invariably manage to conceal these symptoms. Maybe they feel there's some kind of stigma to them, or maybe they think it'll damage their career if it becomes known. And that's where the mental health first aid training comes in. It teaches you to notice signs of people struggling and shows you how to speak with them and to assist them in finding help. From the perspective of the sufferer, a mental health first aider is someone they can turn to when they're not coping too well. It's a win-win situation. Now, we offer training to organisations at their premises or off-site anywhere in the UK, and we hold open courses that anyone can attend as well. So think how your business and your colleagues would benefit from having their own mental health first aider, and feel free to call us and have a chat. And just some wise words I'd like to share with you. The health of our minds matters to ourselves, to those around us, and ultimately to the whole world. Thank you.